Hello, my name's Claire. I'm from Emmanuel at the Villas site, and I'm going to talk this morning from 2 Kings chapter 20 to chapter 22. Today we look at a period of history that's about 700 years before Jesus was born, and the passage covers 2 good kings and 2 evil kings. We're going to look in detail at the end of Hezekiah's reign. It tells us in chapter 18 that Hezekiah was a good king because he worshipped the God of Israel alone. He tried to rid Israel of idolatry, and he was faithful to God's covenant. In the previous chapter, we saw that the Assyrian army were besieging Jerusalem, but Hezekiah prayed and God intervened. But then, at the start of chapter 20, in the midst of this triumph, he's suddenly seized with an illness, and worse than that, Isaiah the prophet tells him to put his affairs in order because he's going to die. But Hezekiah prays, and Isaiah returns with the news that God will heal Hezekiah and add 15 years to his life. God gives a sign to demonstrate that he really did heal him, and the shadow of the sun goes back 10 steps. The story of this miracle may well have spread far and wide and could have provoked the next characters in this chapter, the Babylonians, the sun worshippers. Maybe they were intrigued by the honour their God appeared to have given Hezekiah in going back, and they thought they'd pay him their respects. Hezekiah receives the visitors who bring letters and presents from the king of Babylon. I imagine it was more than a bunch of grapes too. Hezekiah is obviously flattered. In fact, he's prepared to show off all his possessions. It says there was nothing in his house that he didn't show them. When Isaiah appears on the scene and confronts Hezekiah, we see the folly in his pride. So although Hezekiah was one of the best kings that Judah had, he wasn't a perfect king. The passage goes on to describe the reign of Manasseh and King Amon, both who were evil in God's eyes. But at the end of this passage, there's a glimmer of hope with the next king, Josiah, who is good. We know at the end of the line of the kings there will come one who Isaiah prophesied in the line of David, who would rule with righteousness and justice forever, which is the promise fulfilled in Jesus. So there are 2 things that stood out for me when reading about Hezekiah. Firstly, a strange detail that Isaiah uses a cake of figs to put on his boil so that he can recover. But Hezekiah has already prayed, and God has already said that he will heal him, so why is he doing that? It reminded me of the story of Hudson Taylor, the 19th century missionary to China. He was on a ship and wearing a life jacket, and he decided that he was trusting the life jacket rather than God to save him. So he took it off, and later he realised that he was wrong. And he said, the use of means ought not to lessen our faith in God, and our faith in God ought not to hinder whatever means he has given us for the accomplishment of his own purposes. Hudson Taylor had trained as a doctor and realised in his work that he couldn't neglect using his knowledge or resources to treat a patient. And just as you wouldn't stop eating and suppose your body might be maintained by prayer alone, he was able to pray and to act. It was said of him, he prayed about things as if everything depended upon the praying, but he worked also as if everything depended on the working. We see an example here in the Old Testament. Personally, I find it reassuring. We're called as Christians to pray and to act. I'm thankful we have prayer and medicine. If you're struggling with ill health, it can sometimes be a challenge to balance the prayer of faith with taking medicine, but it seems it wasn't a problem for Isaiah. Secondly, and this is the most important point, Hezekiah's response to the revelation from Isaiah that he will die is prayer. Before doing anything, Hezekiah prays. He asks that the Lord would remember him. How do we respond with difficult circumstances or to bad news? Is our reaction to call out to God and ask him for help? I know that my first reaction or response is often to find the resources within myself, rather than to reach out to God in prayer. When I forget to go to God, it can lead to frustration and anger. I can feel overwhelmed because I can't change anything, and I remember then to come to God where I should have started. We know his prayer wasn't very long because Isaiah didn't have time to leave the palace before God called him to take another message to Hezekiah to tell him that he would add 15 years to his life and deliver him out of the hands of the king of Assyria. The next thing that Hezekiah says about Hezekiah is that he wept bitterly. I'm encouraged by this because he wasn't afraid to pour out his emotion to God. This king had been working hard to save the lives of his people. He'd been protecting them from the Assyrians, and suddenly he's confronted by his own mortality. It says in Psalm 62 verse 8, "Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is a refuge for us." And also in Proverbs 18 verse 10, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous man runs into it and is safe." What is a refuge? It's a state of being safe or sheltered from pursuit, danger or difficulty. So today, whatever the challenges you're facing, be like Hezekiah, call out to God and know that you can pour out your heart to him and you can take refuge in him.